Thanks again, Wendy, and welcome everyone and those that are in the process of joining. Looking forward to spending some time together around something that I'm hopeful will be of some shared interest. Taking a look at the agenda today, my first question is, I'm wondering what kind of problems you've experienced in your careers regarding systems development and projects around systems development, whether they be waterfall or agile, whether they're Scrum or PMBOK or oriented. What sorts of challenges, perhaps challenges that have brought you to spend some time in a webinar like this? And have you also wondered, are there better ways to think about systems development projects? Or maybe rededicating yourself to aspects of system development projects that you knew to be effective, that perhaps to which you'd like to return. So during today, we're going to focus on that, and I'm hopeful that we'll leave you with several useful takeaways. So let's proceed and start examining from a couple different perspectives. The first perspective is what some people will refer to as plan-driven approach to projects. Some have referred to it as waterfall. In some ways, over the last several decades, we've helped to formalize our disciplines around project management through the PMI and the Project Management Body of Knowledge. But what we found at Group Atlantic, at what some of the industry research has shown, is several prominent issues have emerged. One is relevancy. We're finding that often a waterfall or plan-driven approach is applied to a project when it's not really relevant to the context of the work or the business objectives. In other cases, we find that it's not used when it is relevant, and sometimes it's because there's a compelling notion that we need to be moving on to modern techniques to the exclusion of consideration, is it the right fit? Are we configuring the right approach to the situation? We're also finding in our work with our clients and looking at industry studies that there's just not enough iteration. Now, iteration comes in both good and bad forms, doesn't it? Iteration that's due to rework is not pleasant, it's costly, it's wasteful. Nobody gets up in the morning to rework effort. Here we're talking about iteration that is on the basis of healthy feedback loops, where we are reflecting and thinking about how things are going, using that feedback loop to take corrective action, to adapt and improve our performance. We're not seeing enough of that. And the bottom line here is that we're seeing that the need for organization change management not broadly recognized, and when it is recognized, it is not effectively addressed. So I'm reminded of a quote here from Isaac Asimov. Maybe some of you have been his readers. The late Isaac Asimov. He says, it is change, continuing change, inevitable change, that is the dominant factor in society today. Isn't this not true? No sensible decision can be made any longer without taking into account not only the world as it is, but the world as it will be. So let's be mindful of that quote as we turn our attention to additional problems from a perspective of agile or Scrum approaches to getting work done. And here in our practice at Group Atlantic, we're finding that very much shortfall in inadequacy in requirements analysis, lacking clarity and specificity of what is it that we're supposed to be doing, why are we doing it, for whom are we doing it, what value is the work. And so often we find that we're doing more things faster, but not quite the right things and not the value-added things. We also find that the connection that the product owner in concept should be bringing us closer to clients and users and the valued needs, that product owners often are not the users and so forth are somewhat disconnected from the voice of the customer. And the users, the voice of the customer, if you will, are still not being heard despite the fact that we have a single throat choke and a product owner that's well integrated with a development team. We're also finding that, just like we saw in the previous slide with waterfall or plan-driven approaches, that organization change management is not often recognized, even when we have Agile or Scrum approach to our work. And then when we do recognize it, it's insufficiently addressed. The outcomes are simply not there. The fourth category of what we find today with Agile and Scrum approaches doing work is that there are not established application architectures, or where there are architectures, they're not widely understood or revisited in some useful or meaningful way. So, keeping in mind Isaac Asimov's quote, "What is the world as it will be, or perhaps what is the world as it should be?" There I'm thinking of a quote, if we turn to slide number 10, from Winston Churchill. And if our desire is to look to the future, look forward, Churchill reminds us in his quote here, the longer you can look back, the farther you can look forward. So let's take a look back in order to better look forward. And in the next slide, on slide 11, there was in the 1970s a Dr. Winston Royce. Some of you may know him by name. Some of you may have even acquainted yourself with his publication, Managing the Development of Large Software Systems. This is kind of a pivotal, seminal document. What it attempted to do early on was to describe the systems development life cycle. Some people call it the SDLC. And from this, Royce was well published, and yet many are confused and wrongly credit Royce with advocating waterfall, or very sequential. In some cases, people will think a wholly and categorically outdated approach to doing work. Turns out that's not how Royce thought about things at all, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that publication. It's not a very long read, but Royce actually advocated iteration. In fact, he cautioned about the risks of just going sequentially from architecture to analysis to design without planning for iteration. And why iteration? It's because the nature of the work is really nonlinear work. We learn as we go along. And so we take a couple steps forward, and then we have to take corrective action and find a new path forward based on what we learn. In Agile, we call it refactoring in some cases, or where we reflect after a 2-week sprint and change our course in order to be more effective in the next sprint. So if you read the paper closely, Dr. Winston Royce actually advocated iteration. Another message that I'd like to convey in this slide is the importance of this enumeration of components of software development, software lifecycle, and it's to include all of these things from architecture to operations. All of these things are critical or fundamental elements of successful software life cycle. You take a look at the next slide. Along came Agile or Scrum in the 80s. There's a publication in Harvard Business Review, the new product development game, and from that article was emerged the metaphor of rugby and Scrum. If you look in the lower left part of this slide, many of you will recognize what you've probably seen before, and is this very iterative approach of a learning, very much a learning approach, and an approach that's more and more widely executed, not only for information technology and software projects, but in our practice, we're finding that this approach called Scrum, which is really about project management, is being applied successfully in our practice to strategic initiatives that have very little to do with information technology. Even information technology projects, all projects are business projects. Some have more information technology than others. Later, to the left and upper right corner of the screen came along the Agile Manifesto, and a new way of thinking. Along came a new way of thinking about getting work done. So think about both waterfall, also might think about that as